I wasn't invited to Christmas dinner. It's just easier without you, my daughter-in-law whispered. So I took back the mortgage payment. That night, I canceled the auto pay. Let's see what's easier now. Through the frosted window of the kitchen door, laughter echoed and voices murmured. I paused, placing a hand on the wooden frame. There was no place for me inside the dinner. I watched from behind the glass as my daughter-in-law leaned in close to my son, their voices low, but I heard every word. If she dies before the 25th, do we still have to buy her a gift? The daughter-in-law asked, so quietly, or so she thought. Don't joke like that, my son replied. I'm serious, she said, and I could feel her eyes on some invisible target. She's like a guilt ghost haunting our Christmas. It was Christmas Eve, December 24th, and I was 78 years old. I stepped from my bedroom, holding a tray of gingerbread cookies and a hand-embroidered tablecloth, symbols of decades of holidays past. I wore my red Christmas dress, faded at the seams but still warm with memory. I took a breath and walked toward the kitchen, carrying love in every careful stitch and baked spice, only to freeze at the threshold. My heart sank, but I did not let a tear fall. I gripped the tray tighter. She smells like old paper and menthol rub, she continued. The scent of menthol lingered faintly in my scarf, the one Thomas used to ask for when his lungs ached. I had worn it tonight like armor, but now it just clung to me like the past they wished I would shed. I recognized the menthol scent on my scarves. Let her eat in the garage, or the car, wherever ghosts go. Her words stung. I pressed my back against the cool glass. Can you tell her to stop knitting crap no one wants? She added. At that, my son crossed his arms. He turned slightly and added, loud enough to carry even through the door, She acts like we owe her just because she signed a few papers. That's what family does, right? Given, shut up. I felt the air tighten in my lungs. The tray slipped from my fingers and clattered onto a side table. Cookies scattered like silence across the polished wood. I should have cried. I should have begged. But there was nothing left to beg for. So I stood still, watching them. Watching the warmth in that room I helped build shrink because I would not act small. I picked up the tray again, cold sugar clinging to my fingertips. I turned from the door and walked down the hallway. The stockings they hung by the fireplace still bore my name, embroidered with care. They had never bothered to remove them, or perhaps they did not dare. I carried the tray out of the house, into the crisp night air, where the cold bit at my heart in ways no one inside could feel. I did not cry when I stepped into the car. I did not try to keep warm with those shattered memories. I closed the door softly, hiding behind the winter frost. I sat in the driver's seat and pulled out my little cell phone, one that never worked well indoors. I dialed the number I had memorized earlier. "Hi, Maggie," I said, voice steady. "It's me." I placed the phone between my ear and shoulder and let the Christmas lights inside my home flicker through the windshield. I watched them, twinkling behind curtained windows. I had once strung those lights myself, twisting the cords around my fingers on nights I could not sleep. "Eleanor?" Maggie said, soft but steady. "It's Christmas Eve," I said, "and they told me I'm a ghost in my own house." There was silence on the other end. She waited. "I'm done," I said. "I'm calling about that mortgage paperwork." I did not leave the car for a long time. I sat through the carols, played silently from inside the house, the laughter that refused to reach me, the warmth that evaporated when I wasn't seen. Eventually, I pulled the keys from the ignition. I gathered the cookies from the floor and wrapped the cloth one last time around the tray, folding it neatly. I pressed my hand to the embroidered surface that carried my heart. Then, carefully, I placed it into the passenger seat. I sat there. Not angry, not crying, just quiet. My breath fogged the glass like steam from simmering broth. I watched until all trace of movement faded inside. Then I stepped out of the car and closed the door. With one slow step, I walked away. That was the night my holiday ended and my reckoning began. I was not always the ghost in their house. Once, I was the woman who held the flashlight steady while my husband fixed the leaky sink at midnight. I was the woman who taught high school students about compound interest and the dangers of predatory loans. I was the one they called Mrs. Reed, with respect, sharp pencil in one hand, coffee in the other. Then came the cancer. My husband, Thomas, had always been stronger than he looked. the kind of man who carried 2 bags of groceries in one hand and our son in the other. But cancer does not care how kind you are or how much you have left to build. It takes, and it takes, and it leaves you smaller. I took an early retirement the week we got the diagnosis, sold the boat we never used, canceled the remodel we had saved for. I moved my desk out of the classroom and my chair next to his hospital bed. By the time he passed, our son was already in his first job, newly engaged, bright-eyed and building. Remembering a centimeter, I still remember the day he came to me and said, "Mom, we found the perfect house, but the bank says the rates are too high." I looked at the paperwork. They had been offered a balloon rate loan. It would have crushed them within 5 years. I had taught my son how to read amortization charts, taught him what compound interest could do to a young family, and still he came to me unaware. I did not scold him. I quietly erased their mistake and wrote their future in my own name. I sat at the kitchen table and quietly took out my old pension binder. I called in the last of the favors from my credit union, and I wrote a check. I did not want thanks. I asked for one thing only. "You'll take care of her until the end," I told them. That's all she asks, a place to belong. I never put it in writing. It felt wrong to make family sign a contract just to love you back. I assumed love was the contract. They moved in, bright with dreams. The house echoed with paint cans and Pinterest ideas and laughter. I visited once a week, then once a month. When my knees began to falter, they offered, not asked, for me to move in. "It'll be good for all of us," my daughter-in-law had said, smiling. Built-in babysitter, built-in love. For the first 2 years I cooked every dinner. I folded every sock. I taught my grandson to read, to tie his shoes, to say please and thank you. They used to thank me, used to say, "We don't know how we'd manage without you." But slowly, gratitude grew quiet. It became routine. Then routine became invisible. I stopped getting called to dinner until it was already on the table. Then not until after they had eaten. The baby outgrew his naps, and me. My daughter-in-law began calling me her when talking to others, as in, "Her room's the one with the old books. She likes things a certain way." She once whispered to a friend on speakerphone, "It's like living with a calendar from the 60s. You feel guilty throwing it out, but it does not match anything anymore." I pretended not to hear. The table I had bought was too crowded now. The blanket I knit was stored in the garage. My rocking chair was moved to make room for a high chair I had assembled myself. They said I was lucky to have a place to live, rent-free. I reminded them, gently, that this house was made possible because of me. "Right, but that was a long time ago," my daughter-in-law said one day, folding laundry. "We pay the mortgage now, you live here." The words stuck like dust in my throat. I had not paid the mortgage directly, no, but I was the one who locked in their fixed rate. I was the one who put up collateral. I was the one who negotiated down their interest with the lender who used to be my student. Still, I said nothing because mothers do not itemize love. We give and hope the memory holds. It did not hold. One Christmas I found my knitting needles in the trash, along with a plate I had hand-painted for their wedding. They said they were decluttering. I said nothing. I became careful, too careful, asking if I could enter rooms in my own house, knocking before opening the fridge, bringing in my own groceries so I would not ruin the meal plan. The worst part was that I began to believe them, that I was in the way, that my value was tied to how quiet I could be, and so I shrank. A woman who once ran a classroom of 28 teenagers and balanced investment portfolios, shrinking into the corners of her own home, until Christmas Eve, when I heard the words, "behind the glass." That was the moment it all turned, not because I was angry, but because I remembered something they forgot. That house was never a gift. It was a responsibility, and they had broken it. It was the kind of silence that feels loud. I was in my room, wrapping the last of the small gifts I had made by hand, lavender sachets for the closets, homemade jam from the prickly pears out back. I had tied the bows just so, folded each tag with careful handwriting. And then I heard her voice. Not yelling, not even bitter, just light, careless. I stepped into the hallway, drawn by the hum of something familiar. her laugh, her phone voice. The door to the kitchen was open just a crack, enough to see the ring light, the phone propped on a stand, her eyes looking straight into the camera. She was live streaming. "No drama this year," she was saying, her smile bright enough to crack bone. "Just peace and a clean table." She turned slightly, and I saw my son in the background, pouring wine. The chat buzzed on the screen. Someone asked, "Where's your MIL?" She leaned in and said it like it was a joke she had told too many times. We finally decluttered. Laughter in the background. Her sister, maybe, or a neighbor. I could not tell anymore. I did not mean to overhear. I had only come down because Maya, the girl next door, had tapped lightly on my window. "They're live," she whispered. "I thought you'd want to know." She slipped away before I could thank her. Then she dropped her voice to a whisper, still smiling, still facing the camera. "I wasn't invited to Christmas dinner," she said, mimicking my voice with a mock frown. Then, shrugging, "It's just easier without her." My son chuckled from off-screen, didn't argue, didn't defend, just lifted his glass. "She's like a coat you outgrow," she added, slicing open another present. "Doesn't mean you hate it, just means it doesn't fit anymore." And then the final blow. "She's just guilt in human form." The chat flooded with laughing emojis. I did not stay to hear more. I backed away slowly, careful not to let the floor creak. My hands were shaking, but not from age. I returned to my room and closed the door quietly behind me. That night, I did not sit at the table. I did not argue. I did not knock. I took the sandwich I had packed for lunch the day before, white bread, a slice of turkey, no mustard, and I stepped out into the cold. The driveway was still wet from a rare Arizona drizzle. I opened the car door and climbed in. No keys. No engine. Just silence. The kind of silence that is not lonely, but clarifying. I ate the sandwich slowly, chewed every bite, watched the windows of the house flicker with Christmas lights and movement. I had taught them so much. I had taught my son to tie his shoes, to use the stovetop, to read the fine print. But I had not taught him how to remember who got him there. I took out my old notebook, the one I used to budget every cent when Thomas got sick, the one I used to scribble lesson plans in the margins, and I wrote 3 lines. Christmas canceled, debt due, Eleanor rising. No exclamation points, no tears, just truth. They had built this house on the foundation of my sacrifice, and now they were dancing on the beams like it would never splinter. But wood remembers pressure, and I was not done being heard. I woke early on Christmas morning, not from excitement, not from tradition, but because cold seeps deeper when you have nowhere to be. The house was quiet, too quiet. No cinnamon rolls baking, no soft carols on the radio. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint echo of laughter behind closed doors. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders, more for comfort than warmth, and made myself a cup of instant coffee. No cream, no sugar, just something hot to hold between my hands. The living room was empty, the fireplace dark, but the Christmas tree blinked its synthetic lights. I sat on the edge of the armchair no one ever used and turned on my phone. They had posted the live stream. I pressed play. The video opened with my daughter-in-law's smiling face framed by a ring light. She had dressed the part, red lipstick, a sequined sweater that read "Slay all day," and earrings shaped like tiny candy canes. Behind her, the house glowed, warm, cozy. The dining table was beautifully set. Pine garland ran down the middle, matching plates, wine glasses, silver cutlery. "No drama this year," she said, beaming into the camera. "Just peace and a clean table." A comment popped up on the screen. "Where's your MIL?" She didn't even blink. We finally decluttered. The room behind her burst into laughter. My son, still in his pajamas, toasted a glass of champagne. Someone clinked a fork against a plate. Another comment rolled in. "That's cold." She shrugged. Hey, sometimes the best gift you can give your family is space. I should have stopped watching, should have closed the app, but I did not. The camera tilted slightly, showing the living room floor, gifts piled high, torn wrapping paper scattered like fallen snow. And then I saw it. A small box, wrapped in silver paper with a blue ribbon. My ribbon. I always used blue for the boys, silver for the girls. And I knew that paper. I had saved it from last year, tucked in the back of my closet. One of the grandkids held up the tag. From Grandma. My heart fluttered. They had kept it? But then came her voice again, sweet and sharp as ever. "Oh, that? She thinks this is love." She plucked the box from the child's hands and held it up to the camera. "This is guilt in a box." The child looked confused. The room laughed. "She's been giving these pity gifts for years. Handmade junk. Jam from God knows what. Socks no one wears. We just smile, say thanks, and toss it before New Year's." My son didn't say a word, just poured more champagne. I put the phone down, not slammed, not dropped, just placed it on the side table like it had grown too heavy. I had saved for months for that jam, picked the fruit with sunburnt arms, boiled and stirred until my fingers blistered. I had bought yarn with coupons, stayed up late to finish every stitch, not because I had to, but because I wanted them to feel remembered, to know I still saw them, even when they stopped seeing me. And they called it guilt. They had taken my presents and twisted it into punishment. They had taken my gifts and turned them into trash. I walked to my room, pulled open the top drawer of my desk and reached for the folder with the mortgage documents. The cosign papers, the auto-pay confirmations. I had not needed recognition. I had never asked for praise, but I had earned respect. And that morning, with a bitter taste of cheap coffee in my mouth and the echo of laughter that was not meant for me ringing in my ears, I knew exactly what had to come next. No drama? Fine. But there would be consequences, and this time they would not be wrapped in silver and blue. The day after Christmas, I folded away the embroidered table runner I had made 5 years ago, the one no one took out this year, and placed it gently back in the cedar box, where I kept everything no one wanted. Then I opened the folder. Mortgage documents, letters of guarantee, auto-pay enrollment forms, each one signed in ink that had faded just enough to prove time had passed, but not so much that the paper forgot its promise. I dialed Maggie. She answered on the second ring. "Elle? I need to initiate a revocation of cosigner privileges and support guarantees," I said, "effective immediately." She was quiet for a beat. Then, as if she had been waiting for the call, "I will draw up the release form today. Do you want to notify the bank or should I?" "You do it," I said. "I want it official. No emotion, just paperwork." By noon, I had the document in my inbox. At 1:17 p.m., the automated mortgage payment was canceled. At 2:03 p.m., the bank recalculated the terms of the loan without my fixed-rate guarantee. The interest doubled. At 2:31 p.m., my son called. I let it go to voicemail. By 3:00 p.m., he was pounding on my bedroom door. I opened it slowly, still in my knit cardigan, a spoonful of jam in hand. He looked like he had aged 5 years in 5 minutes. "What did you do?" he barked. "What the hell did you do?" I raised an eyebrow. "Careful, I am old. I bruise easily. This is not a joke. We just got a notice from the bank. The interest rate jumped. Our payments almost doubled." I stirred the jam into my tea. "Yes, that is usually what happens when the fixed-rate cosigner removes their financial support." "You just doomed us," he shouted. I finally met his eyes. "No," I said calmly. "I just canceled Christmas. For you. In the same way you canceled it for me." He blinked, as if he did not recognize me. As if I had transformed overnight into someone less soft, less pliable, less convenient. "You do not mean that," he whispered. "I meant every spoon of jam, every stitch, every time I turned the other cheek, but I also mean this." He ran his hands through his hair, pacing. "Mom, you do not understand. We cannot afford that jump, not with the business taxes coming due. We will default." I tilted my head. "Then maybe you should have considered that before you decided I was clutter, before you poured champagne over the ashes of my place at the table." "It was not like that," he muttered. I handed him the tea. He did not take it. "I watched the live stream, Michael. I saw the tag on the gift. I heard her laugh. I heard your silence." He looked down. I took a sip. "I do not want your apology," I said. "I want your respect. But you gave that away, so now you owe me money instead." He stumbled backward like I had struck him. "You would do that to your own son?" I stood up, slow but steady. "You did that to your own mother," I replied. I am just responding in the language you understand. Liabilities and leverage. He stared at me. His mouth moved, but no sound came. I will be expecting your first recalculated payment on the 1st of the month, I added. Have a lovely afternoon. Then I closed the door. Not loudly, not with anger, just with certainty, and behind it I finished my tea. Alone, but finally in control. I spent that evening reviewing old bank statements, mortgage paperwork, and tax returns that I had saved in a cedar box under my bed. I looked for anything that could explain how the interest rate had doubled so quickly, something beyond the standard revocation of my co-signer status. I found it. Among the faded receipts and stain-mudged commission slips, there was a credit card statement in my name, issued in my name, used by my son. The card had been maxed out years ago during a small business venture he and his wife started together, a venture that failed and never got mentioned again. It was obvious what had happened. They had taken out the loan in my name to avoid going on the record. I had unknowingly become the guarantor of a failed investment they never disclosed. As far as the bank was concerned, I still owed them. I closed the folder, let out a breath I did not know I was holding. I thought about the stories I used to tell during retirement, that loans are meant to be paid, that agreements are only as good as the character of those involved. I had taught them both those lessons, and they forgot. I called Maggie again. I need to buy the debt that was taken on in my name, I told her, and then I want the title registered in my personal holding company, Business Act Guarantee. Maggie paused, then said, "That is bold." "I am no longer soft," I answered. Over the next few days, she filed the paperwork. We arranged for the bank to sell the defaulted credit account at a discount to outside investors. I paid cash. Cold, slow, deliberate. That same week, bank sent letters to the property address. Ellie Reed is now the official creditor. On record for that loan. The collateral, the house. I was the creditor. They, the debtors. The tables had turned. They tried to argue at first. The texts came in. "Mom, this is crazy. We never agreed to this. This is illegal. Sue us. We will fight. We cannot live under this." I ignored them. I watched as their mouths opened in silent panic. I watched as they scanned the mail, checked their bank accounts, saw the red stamps and official notifications. I held a press conference in my living room 2 days later. I invited Maggie. She brought a report that proved the debt was taken without my knowledge but signed in my name. She filed it with county records. I spoke in front of a single reporter from the local paper who titled the story, "Elder Widow Turns Tables, Becomes Creditor to Her Own Family." I told them, "You sold me out to survive. Now I'm collecting to live." I looked at my daughter-in-law and my son, sitting in folding chairs, their faces pale, their defenses evaporated in daylight. They said nothing, because they could not. I ended the meeting by saying that they had 30 days to either pay back the outstanding debt or vacate. The choice was theirs. It was the same choice I had given them when I called Maggie from my car, only this time the power shifted. On their way out, my granddaughter tripped on a quilt. She looked up at me, frightened, and I smiled and pulled her into my lap. "We'll take care of you, sweet pea," I whispered. That night, their Netflix account was canceled. So was the landscaping service, the holiday decor I had bought, all closed accounts. The house lights went dark by the 27th, except for mine. I lit a single candle in the living room and sat by myself. I thought of Thomas's laugh, the year's teaching, the jam I made, the notebook. Everything they treated like dust suddenly became part of their reckonings. And I was not angry. I was just ready. Because being the creditor meant I stood outside their guilt now. I stood on the firm ground of legality and principle. When the reporter ultimately asked why I didn't just forgive them, I chose silence. I had already said it in the statement. You sold me out to survive. Now I'm collecting to live. Legally, the house was still in their names until default. Emotionally, the debt was theirs well past the final door closed. And for the first time in decades, the foundation they had built crumbled beneath them, not with anger, not with jealousy, but with truth. Because truth does not need a loud voice. It needs faithfulness. And I have always been faithful. They could not pay. They simply could not, and I did not expect them to. By the time the 30-day window closed, the bank had declared default. My son's business was in collections, his wife's side account already drained by holiday displays and wireless upgrades. They were paying everything but what was due. So I sold the house. I did not list it privately or quietly. I entrusted it to an organization I believed in, Transitional Housing for Abandoned Elders, a nonprofit that offers short-term, rent-free apartments during the holidays for seniors who have been estranged from their families. I called the executive director, explained the situation, and they accepted the deed transfer with tears in their eyes. This was never about profit. It was about principle. On the morning of January 2nd, the coldest day Arizona had seen in years, I walked to the house for the final time. I unlocked the door and flicked on the lights so the new caretakers could inspect. I placed the old dining chair, my favorite spot by the oak window, back in its place. Then I walked through every room where I had cooked, laughed, cried, and waited. No added decor, no leftover candles, just silence finally clean. In the foyer, I left a small stack of items, the cedar box with my knitting needles, photo frames of past Christmases, and the blue-ribboned silver gift box. On top I laid one final card with my own handwriting in gentle cursive. You asked what's easier. This. Inside the cedar box, I tucked one last page from my old notebook. It read, "They thought it was just housework, but I built it from the ashes." I bowed my head, walked out, and locked the door, my key swallowed by the mailbox slot. I did not wait to hear them scream. Instead, I walked across the street to the neighbor's house and cupped their daughter's cheek, my granddaughter's teen friend. I told her quietly, "Some houses have to break before they become homes. They say the house sells within a week." Inside the newspaper office, the reporter told me they called it the Christmas Grace Deal, a woman who traded betrayal for blessing. I told them I did not lose the house, I reclaimed its purpose. That night, I returned to the little apartment I had rented, a couple of blocks from the old house. It was small, but mine. I still had my cedar box, my pocket notebook, and most importantly, a future I could build again. I turned on the string lights I had brought, warm gold bulbs, not blinking or demanding perfection, just a steady glow. There was no family dinner waiting, but I had a bowl of soup, homemade crusty bread, and a chair by the window facing the street where Christmas lights still twinkled. Outside, I saw a woman in a red hat, one of the elders from the nonprofit, carrying 2 steaming mugs of cocoa. She knocked gently. I opened the door and let her in. We sat together, sharing warmth across a small card table in the lamplight. She whispered, "You gave this to us. Rest now." I looked around. The walls were bare, the floor was bare, and I felt grateful for the emptiness because it was mine. In the distance, headlights in the old driveway flickered. I did not look. I did not flinch. Later, I found messages on my phone from gallery owners and local artists, women who remembered my knitting, the scarves I made, the quilts I stitched when I first retired. They wanted to feature me in a community exhibition about elders reclaiming agency. I smiled a little. I had not expected applause, but I accepted. Before going to sleep, I wrote again in my journal. They tried to clear me away like dust, but some dust is gold. I hung my shawl by the window and turned off the lights. Tomorrow, I would meet the first woman moving into the old house, the one with no home this Christmas but now a safe passage in. I did not pity myself, not anymore. I had made room, and in making room, I finally belonged. I named it Eleanor's Hearth, a place, a cause, a line in the sand. The foundation was modest, funded from the profits of the house sale, my retirement bonds, and a quiet donation from a former student who had become a senator. But the mission was bold, to provide warmth, shelter, and dignity for women over 60 who had been cast aside by their families during the holidays. We launched just after New Year's with a single rented office, 1 staffer, and a waiting list that broke my heart. Women who had worked, cooked, held hands through loss and birth and funerals, now finding themselves unwelcome at their own grandchildren's tables. They called it seasonal abandonment. I called it a sickness of convenience. And I meant to treat it. Each woman we took in got her own room, a door that locked, a real bed, and her name written in gold marker on a card beside a fresh poinsettia. Not grandma, not dependent, just herself. 1 week into the new year, I sat on the porch of our first transitional home, watching the street. It was cold. Arizona's kind of cold. Not snow, but wind sharp enough to make your eyes sting. I heard footsteps crunching gravel. It was her, Maya, the little girl next door. She had brought me Christmas cookies every year, just 3 on a plate, with a note that said, "We see you." That child had more humanity in her hands than some adults have in their entire lives. And now, at 15, she stood tall at the gate of my rebuilt world, holding an envelope. "I wanted you to have this," she said. Inside was a drawing, colored pencil on construction paper, a fire in a stone hearth, and beside it, a woman smiling, wrapped in a blanket that said, "Safe." I took her hand. "You know," I said, "I do not have many people left I trust with my story." She tilted her head. "But you're not a story," she whispered. "You're the reason stories keep going." And just like that, I amended my will. Maya, kind, brave, unnoticed Maya, would be the sole inheritor of Eleanor's hearth. Not just the foundation, but the copyrights, the original land title, and the cedar chest where I had kept every note, every quilt square, every name of every woman we had helped. I told her this over tea one afternoon. She cried. I did not. I just nodded, as if the universe had finally returned something it owed. Before she left, I held her hand and said, "Promise me, Maya, when someone older sits alone at the edge of the room, pull up a chair. Make them a seat at the table, even if no one else does." She nodded without a word. 2 weeks later, I got the call. Unknown number. I answered. Silence on the line. Then a breath. "Mom?" It was my son. "Mom, we're staying in a motel now. We lost everything. I know we said terrible things, but please, can we talk?" I did not answer. I simply handed the phone to Maya, who happened to be helping me reorganize my files. She looked at the screen, saw the name, and asked with a quiet certainty, "Do you want me to take this?" I nodded. She picked up the receiver and without a hint of malice said, "She's not available." A pause, then with the kind of grace no one can teach, she added, "She finally gets to be the one who chooses who gets a seat at the table." She clicked end call and placed the phone down. We sat together in silence, the kind of silence that wraps around you like truth. Outside, the sun dipped low, and the lamplight inside made the room feel like home. Later that night, I wrote one last note in my journal. I was not erased. I was revealed. And under that, in Maya's handwriting, "She left warmth where they left wounds. ____." The house was gone. The bitterness, too. On the first morning of the new year, I walked into a community kitchen not as someone's burden, but as someone's benefactor. The women there, each with a name no one used, only titles like Grandma June or Ms. Dolores from Apt 3, looked up as I entered with my seed box. Lavender, marigold, daisies, all cut from the last garden I had before I was decluttered. "Who's ready to plant something?" I asked. I did not need applause, only hands, and they raised them, trembling but eager. That became my new tradition, gardens in strange places, raised beds in alleys behind women's shelters, window pots in nursing homes. I called it Last Bloom, because for some of us, it really is. One day in spring, the little girl from next door, the one who brought me cookies when no one else remembered I had teeth, came to visit me at the center. She held her sketchbook close to her chest like it was something secret. "I drew your old house," she said. I smiled. "What made you remember?" She paused. "Because you didn't disappear, even after they made you leave." Then she pulled out the sketch, my old front porch. But in her drawing, I was still sitting there, rocking slowly, holding a basket of yarn, the sky behind me blue and unbothered. I held her hand and said, "When I'm gone, you'll be the one to keep the table set. You'll decide who sits there." Her eyes were wide. She nodded like she had just been given something sacred. That week, I revised my will. The house was gone, but the fund was growing. And in that document I wrote, "To the one who saw me before they erased me, may you always make room for the ones others call clutter. The last Christmas I lived to see, We set the table with mismatched chairs, cracked plates, and more love than I had ever seen in a house of blood relatives. One woman sang carols off-key. Another burned the ham. We laughed anyway, and on the table, where once I was not welcome, there was a place card written in glitter pen. Mrs. Eleanor, founder, fighter, not forgotten. I ate slowly, proudly, chewing with my mouth closed, because sometimes the loudest revenge is living long enough to be celebrated where you were once discarded. And on the windowsill beside my plate, someone had placed a single flower, a marigold, bloomed late, which bloomed bright, just like me. __, thank you for listening to Eleanor's Hearth, a story of quiet revenge, remembered worth, and the power of choosing your own ending. If her story stirred something in you, a memory, a wound, a moment you've never said out loud, you are not alone. There is strength in silence, and sometimes justice wears pearls and walks slow. For more true stories from women who are underestimated and unforgettable, subscribe to Grandma True Stories. Because when a grandmother speaks, the world finally listens. One story at a time, one truth that won't stay buried. I'll be waiting on the porch.